Welcome back to Sprigver Homestead. I'm Nikki, and today we're going to be talking about fermenting chicken feed. So in recent years, fermenting feed has gotten to be really popular, not only with the homesteading backyard poultry groups, just with people in general. There's a lot of fermenting that goes on in human foods as well. You've got kimchi, sauerkraut, a lot of fermented pickles and that sort of stuff. The reason why fermented foods is so popular, either for yourself or for your livestock, is because fermenting changes how the proteins are available in food to make them more readily digestible. It also does some interesting things because it not only preserves the vitamins that are in food, but actually creates some new ones. Primarily, the things that are created are going to be B vitamins. It's a good source of probiotics, and as we know, probiotics keep the gut moving. So while that sounds great, what are some of the big advantages to doing it for your poultry? Well, there are studies out that claim that it will drop your overall feed bill and feed consumption in your poultry by up to 20%. That's not necessarily, as some people think, because it's got water and it's bulkier, that it's more fulfilling, and that's not exactly it. The body only needs what it needs, and if it can more readily digest the proteins and vitamins that is in food, you're less hungry, right? So depending on what you're feeding now, you can expect to see up to 20% savings in your overall feed bill. There is also some arguments saying that it will actually give your hens a chance to lay bigger, healthier eggs. And I don't know how much I believe that. I mean, anything is possible. The big thing here is the healthier the bird, the more efficient the system works, then yeah, I could see where you get more consistency in your lay and probably better quality eggs, because healthier hens lay better eggs. Whether or not they're actually any bigger, I don't know. But I could see where the actual cycle would be more consistent. Fermented feed will also help push them through a molt faster. Again, it's all about leveling off those vitamins. As we know, when they go through a molt, things kind of get crazy up and down a little bit. So what sorts of feeds can you ferment? Well, pretty much anything that you're feeding your poultry is going to be fermentable, particularly your commercial feeds, either your pellets or your crumbles, and you can ferment grains or scratches. We do a couple of different things, which I'll show you in a minute. We, for our quail, primarily just ferment layer crumble, and I tend to have crumble on hand. Pellets would work fine too. I don't do any scratch grains for my quail simply because I'm always concerned that the pieces are a little bit too big. For our chickens, though, we do kind of a mix. It's scratch grains with some layer crumble mixed into it, and it's just a good all-around feed. The big thing here is when it's fermented, even a sub-quality feed, like I don't feed a lot of scratch because it's pretty low in nutritional value, and it's really intended to be more of a treat. When you ferment it, because it makes so many more vitamins available and kind of changes the nutrient level in the feed itself, I don't have any problem fermenting and giving scratch a little bit more often. So what kind of equipment do you need for fermenting? Not a heck of a lot. You need some kind of vessels to ferment in. We use plastic cups and little plastic buckets. You need some kind of measuring device because you want to consistently put the same amount of feed in. You'll need a spoon and some way to drain it. If you're using just like scratch or bigger grains, you can just do a slotted spoon. Because we do crumbles or layer pellets, depending on what I have, I actually have to use like a metal, like a mesh strainer to strain the liquid off. From there, and of course some water, but from there's also two different methods to get your ferment going. You can use organic apple cider vinegar with the mother in it as kind of your starter, or you can do what a lot of people do with sourdough, and that is wait for the natural yeast. I've always used the ACV to get started. It's quicker, and then I recycle my water from one batch to another, so I don't have to use as much going forward. Once this stuff ferments, if you reuse the water, every ferment gets a little bit stronger. As things ferment, they do put out more alcohol. So, one, I don't recommend it every single day. I know people who do, and that's fine. But I have never seen a study long-term of if the building alcohol level in the feed does anything. I don't know that it would, but the other thing to know is that fermenting only takes 3 or 4 days. So it's a pretty quick process. And like I said, if you're reusing your liquid, you can actually shorten that down as much as to 2 days, which I still do 4, but just know that it will speed up the second round and subsequent rounds from there if you're recycling some of your water. Now, you can also do fermenting on a very, very big scale. I have seen people who take the big 55-gallon drums, cut the top off of them, put a couple bags of feed in there, and do what's called a continual ferment all year round, where they dip out some feed and add more and keep using the same liquid. I don't know how I feel about that. I've never tried it, but I do know that there are, I think on YouTube even, there are some people that have done this. I read an article about it years ago of somebody who was doing a continual ferment. For me, I would imagine late in the summer, that's starting to get really, really potent smelling. But as far as any better or any worse nutritionally, I really don't have an answer for that. Okay, so here is 4 days worth of fermentation. 4 days, 3 days, 2 days, 1 day. And I use about a cup of feed, and then I cover the water, or cover it with water by about 2 inches, because you'll kind of see the varying levels. So what I tend to find is that, the first day the feed only comes to about here. So you'll add the feed, you'll add the moisture, and by the 24-hour mark, you can kind of see that that feed has climbed. The second day, you'll start to see it even more. Usually the water's only covering it by about 1/2 inch. And then by about day 3, I start to see that it starts coming back down. And then by day 4, it is shrunk almost back to where it was on day 1. But what you do see is that the particles are far, far finer. All right, so viewing from the top, you'll know that kind of, as you stir it, you'll see a lot of bubbles come up. That's how we know we've done a good job and it's fermented. The other thing that you're going to see if it'll focus here, you'll sometimes see kind of a sludgy mold that will sometimes grow along the edge. Just go ahead and wipe that out. It won't actually hurt anything. If you've got corn or a lot of grains in there, sometimes the floaty ones will kind of get some mold to them. Again, just pick them out. It's not going to hurt anything, but you definitely don't want it in there when you go to strain it for your birds. So to strain it, I use kind of a pitcher because I'm going to reuse this liquid. And then I just use like a metal strainer. And just kind of pour it through there. I've seen people use cheesecloth and that kind of thing. Because I'm reusing it, I'm not too worried if I lose some of it. And you don't have to get it terribly, terribly dry. I'm trying to get most of the moisture sheen off of it. That's how I know it's mostly dry. I've noticed the chickens don't care quite so much, but the quail don't like it overly wet for some reason. At least my quail don't. Okay. And there it goes. Now I just put it back in the container and go out and feed it. You can see it's just, you'll still get some moisture come back up. I just give it a good stir to kind of reincorporate it before I feed it. And then I've got some little cat dishes that I put this in for the quail. Now the process for getting the next batch ready for the chickens is pretty much the same thing. It's a bigger bucket. It's more moisture. Like I said, it's got some actual corn in it from layer scratch. And same thing, just drain it out, put it back in the bucket, go out and feed it. So I was hoping to get you some video of the birds actually eating the fermented feed, but it's raining and you can kind of tell it's raining and the wind's blowing. So I couldn't get, the camera to focus very well, and it was just kind of a mess. It's pretty dark out there. So once you have fed your feed, it's time to go ahead and start making another batch if you're ready to it. Like I said, we continuously feed. And we don't do it a lot during the summer, mostly because I'm just too busy. But fall, winter, and early spring, we go ahead and try and do it. I rotate through my birds, so not everybody is getting it every day, like I mentioned. They get it a couple times a week, but we have enough poultry that we can do that. If you want to feed it every day, that's fine. But if you're having it, or if you're just ready to make another batch, like I said, this stuff takes 3 to 4 days. What you do is you go ahead and put your feed back in your containers. So like on the little container, like I said, it's about a cup of the just crumbled feed. And on the big containers for the chickens, I have about 3 cups of feed in there. I do 2 things of crumble and 3 of the scratch. Now, if you're going to be starting a fresh batch, or you don't want to reuse your water, like on the little cup, so the feed is about there. We're going to come up to about here. So about 2 inches, give or take, over the top of it. And then you add about a teaspoon of apple cider vinegar to it. With the big one, it's kind of the same thing, 2 to 3 inches. So I usually come up to about there. And I do 5 tablespoons. So 1 teaspoon of apple cider vinegar per cup is about what we do with it. Now for me, I'm not going to do any of that for this batch. I'm just going to reuse the liquid that I already have. And now typically this won't cover all of it. So what I do is, like, you'll still have to add some water because some of the moisture from the original batch went out with the feed. So I try and use at least a good inch over each one. And you'll have some feed residue in the bottom, no big deal. It'll get used up eventually. Alright, so once I've kind of split that up, we're about there is all on the little cup. And if you are on city water and chlorinated, you really need to use filtered water for this. That chlorinated will actually kill those good bacteria that you're trying to use to ferment the feed, and won't work. So you'll either want to filter out your water, bottle your water, something along those lines. And I've never noticed it makes any difference, warm water or cold. There we go. All right, and then those just go right back into the rotation. All right, so there you have it. That is how you ferment feed. Pretty easy process. There are lots of people who take the time to stir it 3 times a day and whatnot. I don't bother. I don't put a lid on it. I guess if you've got a lot of problems with bugs, flies, that sort of stuff getting into it, you might want to put some kind of covering over it. I've never had an issue with it. Some things to keep in mind. Start small in the beginning. At least my birds, maybe everybody else's isn't like this, but my birds are always very suspicious of new things. It doesn't matter how many treats we give them, how much produce. They always think the first time we put something out, it's going to kill them. With the fermented feed, you don't want it to sit out for too long because it can mold really, really easily, especially in the summer months. So I try to only put out enough that they can eat in 5 minutes, and anything that they're not eating, I either give to somebody else or toss it. So this is where start small, make sure they're going to eat it is really, really important. If you're going to be using scratch grains in it, you can start by giving them regular scratch grains in the beginning so that they get used to those little yellow chunks of corn mean yummy, and then they're more likely to eat it. But don't be surprised if they give you a hard time with it. It's helpful to have a side dish, a special dish, dog bowl, whatever, to give the fermented feed. Just as something simple and kind of keeps it out of the rest of the feed so you don't have a lot of moisture problems in your regular feed. Fermented feed is pretty much safe for all poultry. If you raise turkeys, you probably already know this, but turkeys also think everything's coming to kill them. So it may take 2 or 3 times before they'll eat it. This is where a dollop, and keep an eye on it. If they won't touch it, give it to the chickens or somebody else who will. My quail tend to be pretty pecky, so they enjoy it. I have one pen that was staring at it like it was from space, so I put a couple mealworms on it, and then they went to town. So there's some things you can do to trick them into eating it. Once they acquire a taste for it, they get pretty excited about it. I'm sure, like eating pickles or sauerkraut, it's probably a acquired taste, I would imagine. So be patient. It does pay off in the long run. And that's kind of it. So get out there and start fermenting. You can use glass jars, plastic, doesn't really make any difference. But it will make a difference to the bottom line of your feed bill. So give it a try. That's it for today from Sprenger Homestead. And I'm going to go out there and do the chores. It's getting windy. Happy homesteading.